On the outskirts of Pine Hollow, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, sat an old abandoned house that locals pretended not to notice anymore. The paint had peeled from its wooden panels like dry bark, and ivy strangled the porch columns. It had been empty for over 2 years, but one afternoon a passing jogger stopped dead in her tracks. Behind the chain-link fence in the overgrown backyard, something moved. It was a dog. Or at least what looked like the ghost of one. The German Shepherd was thin, dangerously so. His ribs pushed against his dull, matted fur, and his eyes were sunken, wary, and dim. A heavy, rusted chain clung to his neck, keeping him bound to the splintered frame of an old doghouse that had long since collapsed. Flies swarmed his water bowl, which was bone dry. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just stared. The woman called animal control. Later that day, 2 officers arrived. One knelt down a few feet away and spoke softly. The dog didn't growl. He didn't move at all. When the leash was finally clipped to his collar, he stood slowly, as if every bone ached. He followed them without resistance, not because he trusted them, but because it no longer mattered where he went. The shelter was already over capacity. Pine Hollow's rescue center had kennels meant for 20 dogs. They were currently housing 31. The staff was tired. Donations were low. And while every life mattered to them, some dogs had better odds than others. This one, he was a lost cause. He was about 5 years old, unneutered, unchipped, and unnamed. They logged him in as Case Ulgeron 77. He didn't react when they scanned for a microchip. He didn't flinch during vaccinations. He simply stood motionless as if waiting for something bad to happen, and for the first few days, nothing did. No one came to see him. Families walked past his kennel without even stopping. They cooed at the puppies, laughed at the scruffy terriers, marveled at the golden retrievers with wagging tails. But not Case Number 77. He just lay in the corner of his kennel, head resting on, his paws staring through people like they weren't even there. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't bark, but his silence made people uneasy. Shelter staff posted his photo on their website just like they did with every dog. His picture was grainy, taken through the bars of the kennel, and his eyes looked almost hollow. The caption read, German Shepherd, male, 5 to 6 years, stray, cautious temperament, needs experienced handler. Days passed, then a week, no calls, no visits. The shelter director, Carla Mendez, stood outside Case Number 77's kennel on a rainy Tuesday morning. She sighed and crouched down. He opened one eye, then closed it again. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a dollar bill, taped it to the kennel door, and posted a new message online. His adoption fee is $1, just $1, that's all. Because he's not worthless, but because time is running out. Some called it manipulative, others called it desperate. Carla didn't care. She had seen too many good animals leave the world without ever knowing kindness. Maybe this way someone would look past the matted coat, the empty stare, and the broken spirit. Maybe someone would see what was still buried, beneath it all. What Carla didn't know was that someone had already seen him, not someone with a fancy home or experienced training dogs, not a rescue group or a retired vet. It was a little girl with scraped knees, a savings jar of lemonade stand money, and a heart that didn't know how to walk away from something broken. Her name was Sophie, and she was about to change everything. Sophie. Williams had never been to the animal shelter before. She'd passed it during car rides with her mum, the small concrete building with a faded paw-print sign and chain-link fencing around the yard. It didn't look like much. To her, it was just one of those grown-up places, like the DMV or the laundromat. Necessary but invisible, until she saw the photo. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening, one of those slow, golden hours when the sun stretches across everything and the world feels gentle. Sophie was curled up on the couch with her mom's old tablet, absent-mindedly scrolling through pictures of bikes. She had her eye on a fire-engine red one with a little basket and silver streamers on the handlebars. The savings jar in her room held $62.50, all from her lemonade stand. It had taken her 3 months, 2 summers' worth of sunburns, sticky hands, and polite smiles, to save that much. Then the post caught her eye. A grainy photo. A sad dog. The caption, German Shepherd, male, approx, 5 years, $1 adoption, fee. Sophie didn't know why she tapped it. Maybe it was the way his eyes looked like they were waiting for someone. Maybe it was the dollar price that made her blink. But when she read the words, because he's not worthless but time is running out, something inside her shifted. She stared at that photo for a long time. Then she went to her room, dumped out the jar of coins and crumpled bills onto her bed, and picked out the cleanest dollar bill she could find. She folded it in half, then again into quarters. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something she didn't have words for. Yet she was only 8. But she knew what being unwanted looked like. That night at dinner, she didn't say a word about the dog, not when her dad asked how school was, not when her mom reminded her to finish her science project. She just quietly tucked the dollar into her backpack and asked if they could go to the shelter, just to look after school. Her mom hesitated. "We're not getting a pet, Sophie. You know that." "I know," Sophie said. "I just want to see." The next afternoon, they pulled into the shelter's gravel parking lot. It smelled like bleach and damp fur. Sophie didn't flinch. She walked right up to the front desk, backpack slung over one shoulder, and told the receptionist she wanted to see the $1 dog. The woman blinked. "You mean the German Shepherd?" Sophie nodded. "He's not really a good match for kids," the woman said gently. "He's been through a lot." "I just want to say hi," Sophie replied. The staff reluctantly led her back to the kennels. Caster 77 lay in the corner, unmoving, his back to the gate. Sophie knelt down anyway. She didn't speak at first, just sat quietly, letting the seconds stretch. Eventually she began to hum, a soft off-key version of a lullaby her mom used to sing. Then she whispered, "Hi, my name's Sophie. I brought $1 for you." The dog turned his head, slow and careful. His eyes met hers, and in that strange, perfect moment, amid the barking, the clanging bowls, the grey floors, something passed between them. He didn't growl, he didn't shrink back. Instead, his ears twitched slightly. His tail, ragged and still, gave one hesitant thump against the floor. From the other side of the gate, one of the shelter workers gasped. "He's never done that before," Sophie smiled. "I think he just needed someone to talk to." She stood up, brushed the dust from her knees, and reached into her backpack. With both hands, she placed the folded dollar into the staff member's palm. "I'd like to. Take him home, please." The shelter staff weren't in the habit of letting 8-year-old girls adopt large, traumatized dogs, especially not ones like Case number 77, untrained, underweight, and clearly haunted by a past no one could trace. Sophie's bold declaration, "I'd like to take him home," hung in the air like a balloon that no one wanted to pop. "Sweetheart," the staffer, a kind middle-aged woman named Dana, said gently, kneeling down to Sophie's level. "I know you mean well, but this dog, he's not ready for a home." "Not yet," Sophie frowned. "But he wagged his tail, that means something, right?" "It does," Dana admitted, "but it doesn't mean he's safe. We don't know what he's been through. We think he was abused. He flinches when people move too fast. He doesn't eat much, he doesn't trust anybody." Sophie tilted her head. "But maybe he trusts me." Dana blinked. She'd worked in rescue for 15 years and seen miracles, but also heartbreak. She wanted to protect this little girl from disappointment as much as she wanted to protect the dog from more trauma. Still, something about Sophie's presence had changed the room. Even the dog, still lying quietly in the corner, was watching her now. Dana sighed. "Where's your mom, hun?" Sophie pointed toward the front office. "She's waiting. She said we were just looking. But I brought $1. That's what he costs, right?" Dana chuckled softly despite herself. "Technically, yes." When Sophie's mother, Emily, was called to the back, she arrived flustered, assuming her daughter had misunderstood something. But when she saw the dog, how quiet he was, how calmly he watched Sophie, how Sophie knelt down and started talking to him again like they were old friends, she froze. "He hasn't barked," Dana said, "or growled. He even got up to follow her when she walked by earlier. Emily looked at her daughter, who was now telling the dog about her science project and how she hated raisins in cookies. I thought she wanted a bike, Emily murmured. Maybe she still does, Dana said, but this feels different. Still, the rules were the rules. Dogs didn't go home the same day, especially not ones with behavioral flags. We can't release him today, Dana told them, but if your family is serious, we can start the process. It'll be a foster to adopt situation. You'll need to meet with our trainer, and we'll have to come check the home. Emily hesitated. A big dog like that might with a little girl. I'll help, Sophie said quickly. I'll walk him and feed him and teach him to be safe. Dana gave them both a long look. We'll give it a try, she said softly, but only if your whole family is on board. That night, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Sophie made her pitch to her dad. He needs me, she said. Nobody else wants him. Not even for $1. Sweetheart, we've never had a dog. We don't know how to train one, especially one that's had a hard life. I'll learn, she said firmly, please. Her dad looked across the table at Emily, who gave a small, reluctant nod. And so they agreed. Just a foster. 1. Week. 1 chance. If things didn't work out, the dog would go back. The next morning, Sophie returned to the shelter with a leash she'd borrowed from a neighbor, a bag of dog treats, and the widest smile on her face. Case No. 77, now Shadow, stood when she approached, ears perked just slightly. He let the leash slip over his neck without protest. As they walked out of the shelter together, Shadow glanced back once. Just once. Then he kept walking, right beside the girl who'd paid for him with more than just money. She'd paid with heart, and he wasn't about to lose that. Bringing Shadow home was nothing like Sophie imagined, and everything her parents feared. He didn't run through the yard or explore the house with tail-wagging excitement. He didn't lick faces or roll over for belly rubs. Instead, he walked in slowly, head low, eyes darting to every corner like he was mapping a battlefield. When Sophie unclipped the leash, he didn't bolt. He didn't move at all. He simply stood still in the center of the living room, uncertain, silent, waiting. Her father, Mark, stood with his arms crossed. "This dog is huge," he muttered under his breath. "He's beautiful," Sophie whispered. Shadow eventually lay down on the rug, his back to the wall, never taking his eyes off the family. Sophie stayed near him, close but not too close, just like the trainer had taught her. "Let him come to you," the shelter had said. "Don't force it. Let him feel safe." For the first 2 days, Shadow barely moved. He ate only at night. When the house was quiet, he never barked, never whined. If Sophie got too close too quickly, he'd flinch and shuffle back. "Is this how it's going to be?" Mark asked on the 3rd night. "This standoff?" "It's only been a few days," Emily reminded him. "He's still figuring it out. Give him time." Sophie did more than give him time. She gave him routine. Every morning before school, she'd sit on the floor with a bowl of kibble beside her, speaking softly as she read aloud from her library books. She never reached out, never pushed, just stayed. Sometimes Shadow would eat. Sometimes he'd just stare. On the 5th morning, something changed. Sophie had fallen asleep on the floor. The book slipped from her hand. When Emily came in to wake her, she froze. Shadow was lying just inches away from Sophie, his head resting near her shoulder, eyes closed, not watching, not wary. Just resting. Emily's breath caught. Later that day, Sophie told her dad what happened. "I think he's starting to like it here." Mark looked at his daughter, small, determined, so sure. "Maybe," he said, cautious, "but liking it and living here permanently are 2 different things." That night, he watched from the hallway as Sophie carefully brushed Shadow's fur with a soft mitt. The dog didn't move away. He leaned into her hand. By the end of the 1st week, the house had changed in quiet, subtle ways. Shadow no longer slept in corners. He chose the spot near Sophie's bed, always facing the door. When the mailman came, he didn't bark, but he rose and stood alert. He was watching, protecting, claiming this space as his. Sophie's parents noticed something else too, how Sophie herself had changed. She was more patient, more focused. She woke up early. She spent less time on screens, more time with books about dog behavior and training. When Emily dropped a glass in the kitchen and it shattered, Sophie didn't scream or cry like she usually did. She looked at Shadow, tense and frozen, and calmly sat down next to him. "It's okay," she whispered. "It was just a noise." That moment struck Emily hard. Shadow wasn't the only one learning to feel safe. At the end of the foster period, the shelter called to schedule a check-in. "We're supposed to come inspect the home," Dana said over the phone. "And if it looks good, finalize the paperwork." Mark took a deep breath. "You don't have to," he said. "We've already decided." "Oh?" "We want to keep him." In the background, Sophie's joyful squeal carried through the line. Shadow, lying nearby, lifted his head and looked toward her. For the first time, he wagged his tail without hesitation. Not once, not twice, but over and over, slow, sure, and steady. He was home. Shadow had been with the Williams family for just over 3 weeks when he barked for the first time. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was enough to make the entire living room fall silent. It happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon. The family was inside, curled up for movie time. Sophie had picked an old cartoon about a dog who flew airplanes. Shadow lay at her feet, eyes half closed, finally comfortable enough to nap with people moving around him. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Shadow's head shot up, his ears perked, his body stiffened. Mark rose from the couch. "Probably delivery," he muttered. But before he could move, Shadow barked. Just once. A deep, low rumble from deep in his chest. A warning, not a threat. A voice finally found. Sophie gasped, turning to him. "You barked," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might scare him back into silence. Shadow stood between her and the door. The delivery was harmless. Just a neighbor dropping off a misdelivered package. But to the Williams family, the moment was unforgettable. "He's starting to trust us," Emily said later, stroking his head as he rested near the kitchen. "Or he's claiming us," Mark added. "Either way, I'm okay with it." Sophie beamed. "He knows he belongs here now." But with progress came new challenges. Shadow had bonded deeply with Sophie, but only Sophie. He still backed away from Mark's outstretched hand, flinched at the sound of the vacuum, and refused to step outside during thunderstorms. And although he now followed Sophie everywhere, like a silent guardian, he growled if anyone raised their voice near her, even her parents. "Protectiveness is normal," the shelter trainer explained during a follow-up. "But we have to teach him that your daughter doesn't need saving every second. He's not a soldier anymore. He's a pet." The trainer's words lingered. It was true. Shadow didn't know how to relax. His eyes were always watching, calculating. He rarely played. He didn't chew toys or chase balls. He didn't understand games. He understood loyalty, silence, and shadows. That was all he knew. But Sophie wasn't ready to give up on Joy. One day she came home from school with a tennis ball. Shadow stared at it like it was a threat. Sophie knelt beside him on the lawn. "It's not scary, it's fun. Watch." She rolled it across the grass. It bounced gently, then stopped. Shadow didn't move. Sophie tried again, and again, and again. Still nothing. But on the 4th day, something changed. Sophie tossed the ball a little farther, just a soft underhand throw. It landed near Shadow's paws. He sniffed it, nudged it once with his nose, then looked up at Sophie as if to say, "Now what?" Her heart skipped. The next toss, he batted it back. It was clumsy, awkward. But it was the beginning of something new. From then on, Sophie practiced with him every day after school. Rolling, tossing, gently coaxing, until finally, after 2 full weeks, Shadow chased the ball down the yard and brought it back, not to her hand, but close enough. Sophie cried, right there in the grass. Mark watched from the porch, coffee in hand, awe on his face. "She's teaching him how to be a dog," he said softly. "No," Emily replied, eyes misty. "She's teaching him how to feel safe." That night, Sophie lay on the rug with Shadow curled beside her, his nose tucked against her leg. She read from her favorite book, her fingers idly running through his fur. "You're not broken," she whispered. "You're just healing." Shadow didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He sighed, a deep, full-body sigh, the kind that comes when fear begins to let go. And for the first time since coming home, he slept without waking once. It was a bright spring morning when trouble found them. Sophie had been begging to bring Shadow to the park for weeks, not just for a walk, but to show him off, to let people see how far he'd come. Her parents were hesitant, still unsure how Shadow would behave around crowds or children other than Sophie. But the trainer had cleared him. "He's made incredible progress," she said. "He's still cautious, but he looks to Sophie for direction. That's trust. Just keep him leashed and watch his body language. He'll be okay." So, on that sunny Saturday, they clipped on his harness and set out for Greenview Park. Sophie held the leash. Shadow walked calmly beside her. Emily and Mark followed close behind, carrying snacks and a blanket. Other families were already there, children climbing jungle gyms, teens tossing frisbees, dogs barking in the distance. Shadow's ears twitched at every sound, but he didn't pull or panic. He stayed close to Sophie, alert but calm. She led him to a shady spot near a bench and sat down, petting his back. "You're doing so good," she whispered. He leaned into her hand. For the first half hour, everything went perfectly. A few curious kids approached to ask about the big German shepherd. Sophie answered proudly, but always kept them from reaching out without permission. "He's still learning to trust," she explained, just like the trainer had taught her. Then came the boy in the red hoodie. He was older, maybe 12 or 13, and he wasn't part of the nearby families. He had earbuds in and a half-eaten candy bar in one hand. He walked too fast, too close, and didn't notice the dog until he was right beside them. Shadow sprang to his feet, body tense, a low growl rumbling from his throat. The boy startled and shouted, stumbling back. Sophie jumped up. "It's okay. He's just scared. He didn't mean to." But the boy was already yelling. "That dog's crazy. He tried to bite me." Other parents turned. People stared. Mark rushed over. "It's all right, everyone. He didn't bite. He was just startled. No one was hurt." The boy stormed off, still shouting about dangerous dogs and lawsuits. Sophie knelt beside Shadow, who was now shaking, tail tucked tightly between his legs. "It's okay," she whispered, her arms wrapped gently around his neck. "You didn't do anything wrong." But Emily could feel the shift in the crowd, the unease, the way some parents pulled their children away. Afterward, they walked home in silence. Shadow lagged behind, glancing over his shoulder like he expected trouble to follow. Back at the house, Sophie sat with him for hours. She didn't cry, not until everyone else had gone to bed. "Why can't people see what I see?" she whispered into his fur. Mark overheard and sat beside her. "Because not everyone sees with their heart." Sophie looked up at him. "He didn't hurt anyone." "I know. And you handled it better than most adults would have. Will they take him away?" "No," Mark said firmly. "No one's taking him from you." Still, the incident left a shadow, not just on Shadow, but on the family. The trainer came for a special session the next day. He didn't react out of aggression, she explained. He was startled. "You were right to remove him quickly and calmly. Sophie's instincts were perfect." "But what if it happens again?" Emily asked. "It might," the trainer admitted. "But fear isn't failure. He's learning, and so are you." Sophie nodded. "We'll keep practicing." Shadow rested his head in her lap as if agreeing. He didn't need perfection, he needed patience. And Sophie, tiny, determined, and full of love, had more than enough of that. The world might see a damaged dog, but Sophie saw a protector, a survivor, a best friend who just needed time. It was almost midnight when the sirens wailed. Sophie sat upright in bed before she was even fully awake, heart pounding. Shadow was already up, ears forward, tail stiff. A faint orange glow flickered against her bedroom walls. Then came the unmistakable smell. Smoke. Emily's voice echoed down the hallway. "Mark! Sophie! Get up! There's a fire next door!" Sophie scrambled to her feet as her father burst into the room, scooping her into his arms. "We need to go. Now." But Shadow didn't follow. He stood frozen at the bedroom door, staring down the hallway. The smell was stronger now. The window panes glowed with the blaze from the neighboring house. "Shadow!" Sophie cried, reaching over her dad's shoulder. "Come on, boy." He didn't move. Mark hesitated. "We have to go." "No, he's scared. I can't leave him." Mark lowered her to the floor. Try, but only for a second, Sophie, only a second. Sophie turned and knelt beside Shadow. The hallway behind them hissed with smoke, and the sound of breaking glass cracked like gunfire. It's okay, she whispered. I know it's loud, I know it smells like danger, but I'm right here. He shook, every muscle tense. I'm not leaving without you, she said firmly, placing her hand over his heart. You're brave. You've always been. Brave? This time I need you to be brave for me. Shadow blinked slowly. Then, as if something inside him snapped back into place, he stepped forward. Once, twice. Then he pressed against her side. Together, they ran. Down the hall, through the front door, out into the cool night air where fire trucks roared and neighbors stood in pajamas, watching the inferno next door devour the garage of the Simmons house. The Williams home was safe, but the heat had come dangerously close. Emily wrapped her arms around Sophie the moment she emerged. Thank God. Mark came right behind them, coughing but grinning. That's our girl and our dog. Shadow stood beside them, panting but alert, eyes scanning the scene. And for the first time, he didn't tremble. He stood tall. The fire was contained within the hour. No one was hurt, and the Simmons' elderly dog Max had also been rescued by firefighters. The neighborhood buzzed with relief but also praise. That girl was incredible, said a firefighter. She calmed her dog right down. We've seen grown men fall apart in less smoke. Dana from the shelter called the next day after seeing Sophie's name on the local news. You two have come a long way, she said with a smile in her voice. He saved us, Sophie said proudly. No, sweetheart, Dana replied. You saved each other. Later that week, the family received a surprise in the mail. A certificate of courage for Sophie, issued by the local fire department. It wasn't fancy, just paper and ink, but Sophie taped it right above Shadow's bed. You were the brave one, she told him. This is yours too. Shadow, now filled out and gleaming with health, lay down beneath it, resting his head on her feet. That night, Sophie sat on the porch beside her dad, watching the stars. I used to think dogs just barked and played, she said. I didn't know they could hurt like people do. They can, Mark said, but they can heal too. Sophie smiled. Just like us. Behind them, Shadow nudged open the screen door and padded out, sitting at Sophie's side. He didn't flinch at the wind or the crackling leaves or the distant sound of a fire truck passing on the main road. He just sat there, calm, steady, home. 6 months after bringing Shadow home, the Williams family celebrated a quiet anniversary. Sophie remembered the date, not because it was marked on a calendar, but because it was marked on her heart. The day she saw the flyer taped to the grocery store window. Abandoned German Shepherd, $1 or free to good home. That $1 had changed everything. On a golden Saturday afternoon, the family hosted a backyard barbecue. It wasn't for a holiday. It wasn't for a birthday, it was for something better. Healing, hope, and new beginnings. Neighbors who once eyed Shadow cautiously now greeted him with warm smiles and gentle pats. Kids played fetch with him across the grass, giggling as he chased the ball with genuine joy, not the clumsy, unsure stumbles of the past, but full sprints, tail high, eyes bright. He had become the dog no one thought he could be, the dog he never knew he could be. He's a different animal, Mark said, flipping burgers by the grill. He used to be a shadow. Now he's the sun. Emily laughed. You've been saving that one, haven't you? Mark grinned. Maybe. Sophie sat under the big oak tree, leaning back against its trunk. Shadow lay beside her, one paw touching her leg, as he often did now. He liked to be close. Hey, boy, she whispered. Remember the day I met you? You were so scared. Shadow lifted his head and looked at her, not through her, at her, with warmth, with understanding, with love. Everyone thought you were too broken. But I knew, she said. I just knew. She looked around the yard. Families laughing, music playing, dogs chasing one another. The old pain was gone. Not forgotten, but transformed. Suddenly a familiar face appeared at the gate. Dana, the shelter volunteer who had first handed Sophie the leash, walked in carrying a small box wrapped in craft paper. I hope I'm not too late, she said. You're right on time, Sophie beamed, running over to hug her. I brought something. Dana said, handing over the box. "Just a little gift for the both of you." Inside was a small wooden plaque with 2 burned-in paw prints and the words, "You didn't rescue a dog, you gave a soul a reason to stay." Sophie's throat tightened. Her parents read the plaque over her shoulder, both falling silent. Shadow came to sit beside her, as if sensing the emotion in the air. Sophie leaned down and kissed his forehead. Later that evening, as the guests drifted home and the sky turned from amber to indigo, Sophie and Shadow sat together on the porch, just like they had the night of the fire. The stars blinked to life. Above them, "You're not the same dog," she whispered, "and I'm not the same girl." She thought about how afraid she used to be, of speaking up, of standing out, of being different. Shadow had changed that. Loving him had taught her how to fight, how to be patient, how to believe in something even when the world didn't. He hadn't just become her best friend. He had made her brave. Mark joined them a few minutes later with mugs of hot chocolate. "You know," he said, handing her a cup, "I still remember saying no." Sophie smirked. "You said definitely not." He laughed. "And now I'd be lost without him." Shadow sighed contentedly and rested his head on Sophie's lap. "Most people would have seen a big, broken dog and walked away," Mark continued. "But you saw a story waiting to be rewritten." Sophie looked up at the stars. He just needed someone to turn the page. And she had. For $1, Sophie bought a dog. But what she really got was a lifelong friend, a healed heart, and a lesson in unconditional love. It was the best dollar anyone had ever spent.